Hello, my name is Sarah Jones, and I'm here with a Wildcards author panel, and we're so excited to start this off, and I'd like to introduce Melinda Snodgrass.
Hi, I'm Melinda Snodgrass. I'm a novelist and a screenwriter. I have a big space opera series. This is the first book called The High Ground, and other works. And, I keep a foot in both camps, both Hollywood and in New York, writing novels, and love it. Writing has made my life a very happy place.
And we have Walter John Williams joining us. Can you say
Hello
hi?
there. I'm Walter John Williams. This year, I am celebrating my 40th anniversary as a published full-time writer, during which time I have written about 40 volumes of fiction, including, and also I've written for the gaming field, for the screen, and for graphic novels.
And Carrie Vaughn is on the team as well. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Carrie Vaughn. I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer, novels and short stories. Probably best known for my Kitty Norville urban fantasy series about a werewolf who hosts a talk radio advice show, as well as a number of short stories. And a couple of years ago, the Philip K. Dick award-winning novel Bannerless.
Woohoo!
And finally, Carolyn Spector.
My name is Carolyn Spector. Hence the little sign down there. And I've been working in the gaming and science fiction fantasy writing world over the last, 30 some odd years. And I'm pretty sure that makes my mother a toddler or something. And I've done a little bit of everything. I've edited, I've done computer game hint books, I've done modules for a couple of different lines, TSR lines. And I wrote novels for Shadowrun and Earth Dawn. And I've been writing for Wildcards for the last 11 years, and that's it.
Great. It's so wonderful to be part of this group. Can you tell me a little bit about the origins of how the role-playing group came together?
That's going to have to totally be Walter and Melinda.
Walter actually introduced me to role-playing games. I didn't know such a world existed, and I got invited to a Call of Cthulhu game he was running, and I was hooked. I fell in love with it. And then when George moved down to New Mexico, we sort of enfolded him into the madness. And one of our early writers, one of our original writers, who sadly we lost to cancer a few years ago, Victor Milan, gave George a Superworld game, and we began to obsessively play it. And Walter, talk about the obsession a bit. It was too many hours, right?
Well, I think probably George sacrificed part of his career to Superworld. I was talking to Paris, and she said, well, I'd be passing by his office when he was supposed to be working, and I'd hear him rolling dice and chortling, and because he was creating characters, and he ended up with hundreds of Superworld characters, I think.
Yes.
And in fact, I ran a Superworld campaign eventually.
George, we were playing mostly in Albuquerque, and George, at the time would spend the night after, because we'd play till like 2 a.m, and he would stay over in my guest room. And one Sunday morning, he came staggering out as I was fixing breakfast, and he said, there's got to be a way to make money off this obsession. And for the next 3 hours, we sat over coffee and blueberry pancakes and came up with the idea of doing this as a shared world. And, George wanted it to be in Gotham. He's an old comic book fan. It had to be New York. And one of the things George always hated was the multiple origin stories. I'm standing in a toxic waste dump and I get struck by lightning and I end up with superpowers. And so I said, well, what if it's a virus that's released, and then it became an alien virus? And, that's where it started. And then George went out and, started recruiting writers. And some of the people were, people in the game, because a number of us were novelists. And of course, Carrie has a really interesting sort of how you came, how we found you and how you came to us. So
yeah, it's so much fun hearing about these behind the scenes stories because shortly after this, as Melinda was saying, they were spending so much time on it, they needed to find a way to monetize it so that they could justify all the time they were spending. And that was right around the time I was in high school, and I discovered the novels when I was in high school and read them obsessively. I became a huge Wild Cards fan. I wrote George fan mail a couple of years later. I think I was in college by the time I wrote that fan mail, and he wrote back. Which was great. And what was even better was discovering he still had my letter in his files. He's got filing cabinets with all of his old correspondence and everything in it. And that was just so neat. But I wanted to be a writer. So I worked at being a science fiction and fantasy writer. And it was a while after college before I actually finally met all of you guys. Another Wild Cards writer, Daniel Abraham, invited me down to WonderCon. Where I got to meet George and Melinda and Walter and Vic and all of these writers who I'd been reading in Wild Cards for years and years. The story I tell is that I had enough like self-possession and poise that, asking if I could write for Wild Cards was the second thing. I was actually able to say, yes, it's very nice to meet you. I'm happy to be here. And then I asked, do you need any new writers for Wild Cards? Because I'd love to do it. And fortunately, the answer to that was yes. And here I am.
That's such an amazing story. Can you tell me, as a high school student, where did you run into the Wild Card series?
A bookstore. And it's once again, it's kind of funny hearing some of these stories now. The first one I read was not the first one in the series. It was volume 5, Down and Dirty. Which I loved. I loved it so much. Oh, I'm so glad to see you rubbing your hands there.
It's actually on my shelf and I have the vintage cover, which I geek about.
I love that cover so much.
Yeah. Vagabond with all her cats. And yeah, it's
really, on the subway.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, it was that cover that caught my eye because it was so different from everything else on the shelves. I think everything else on the shelves at the time was, kind of spaceships, or weird cyberpunk abstract. There was just a lot of other stuff going on, but this one had like characters and weird things, and it was a scene, and I wanted to know what was going on. And fortunately, when I read the book, it was also completely different from anything else I had ever read. It was superheroes, but it was so grounded in reality. And as I'm a big superhero fan, I grew up watching Linda Carter's Wonder Woman, the Incredible Hulk, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, so I was really steeped in that, but I had never seen it so grounded in reality. And that just hooked me right from the start.
That's awesome. That's really cool. The next question I'd like to follow up with Melinda, who made the blueberry pancakes?
I did, of course. But Caroline is sort of, you were not that first group of, all of us crazy people, but more, and yet you came into this before Carrie did, as I recall.
I think Carrie and I kind of came in at about the
same time.
But
oh, really? Okay.
I actually knew about Wild Cards because I was down in Austin, and the Austin Wild Card writers were there. Howard was there, and Simons, and a couple of other people were there, and they were actually writing. And I got to be a character in Wild Cards. I was one of Fortunato's hoes.
Oh.
It's always a pet. And I got killed horribly by the astronomer. So, in fact, Bud killed me. And I said, make it graphic and make it gory, make people remember it. And he did, and he gave me the pages. And I said, please don't put that in the book. So there's something very close to that. But anyway, so yes, I came in about the same time Carrie did those. So my route was much more circuitous. I actually went off and did game stuff, game writing and computer game hint books, and worked for TSR and that sort of stuff. Did some novels in the Shadowrun and Earth Dawn series. So I came by it game wise, and I guess osmosis. Anyway.
Wow, that's such an interesting connection, and how everybody's world ended up in the same place. That's awesome.
I've heard stories about the folders and notebooks of NPCs that George developed for the game.
Yes.
And a lot of people always ask, well, how many of those old NPCs and characters and how many files from that folder actually made it into the books? And it's not as many as you would think, just because, you know, what is often fun in a game doesn't make for good story, you know, when you're actually writing.
Yeah, actually very few. I mean, oddly enough, though, one of our most beloved characters is George's character, the Great and Powerful Turtle.
Yeah.
And he played the turtle. Vic also ran a Super World game, but there were a lot of Super World games that cabbed off of George's. And George created the turtle for Vic's game. And then that character did come over. But, you know, most of us, we ended up creating new characters. I mean, Walter, in many ways, you wrote the first Wildcard story, even though it never appeared in a book, because you were so excited when we said, hey, how about we all do a shared world? We've got a bard, we've got the lights, let's put out a book. And you went nuts.
So I wrote a story that had Modular Man and Black Shadow in it, who, you know, later ended up in the Wildcard series. But that particular story never appeared because by the time Wildcards actually came together, the universe had moved beyond that story. So that story has actually ended up in a collection of mine. But I'm sure it just bewilders everybody who reads it because it's not sufficiently connected with Wildcards as it is now and as it became, and it's totally unlike anything else in that collection. So, yeah.
How did you actually become an author, and what led you to science?
Well, for me, it was a total compulsion. That I was compelled to write. I was compelled to write from about the age of 4. I didn't know how to read or write, so I would dictate stories to my parents, who would write them down, and then I would get out my crayons and illustrate them. And I'm sure it was adorable, and I'm glad none of those have survived. But so there's a I don't know, a truism that in order to become a successful writer, you have to write 2 million words of crap first, right? And I got my 2 million words of crap out of the way by the time I was 16, probably, because I was just writing continually from a very early age.
Was it genre specific, or did you just write?
I did everything.
Nice.
I wrote, my writing was all over the map. Oddly enough, I didn't write science fiction because I didn't think I was good enough. I had a very high standard for science fiction because I grew up reading like the 60s wave.
Right.
Zelazny and Delaney and Spinrad and Joanna Russ and Ursula Le Guin. And I thought, I can't play in that league, at least not now. So, but editors changed my mind and started buying my science fiction. So here I am.
It's awesome. I'd like to have all of the authors answer that question. Caroline, how did you decide to become an author?
Well, I'm not one of those people who burned. I read a lot. I read copious amounts. Of course, I can't remember it because my memory's gone, but I wanted to be a musician, actually. And I did that until I was in college. And then I decided I wasn't good enough. And I sort of floundered around. I was in a radio and film major, and, you know, I sort of did all that. And Warren and I, my husband, we moved up to TSR, and it was something I had wanted to do for a while since I was in college, but I hadn't really felt like it was, you know, that I had the chops for it. And it took me quite a while to feel as if I had the chops for it. And I think a lot of it helped was I actually did editing before I started writing. And I think that helped a lot because I saw a lot of like, maybe I don't want to do this myself. But I'm really glad I did, because it's been a real delight of my life when it isn't driving me crazy.
Yeah, I think reading the slush pile will either break you or make you into a real writer, you know. But
I will say that and this is a dirty secret. When I was reading the slush, and they do it differently nowadays, I know, but I did get to the point. I used to read every single manuscript when I started out, all the way through, because I felt like everybody deserved that. No, they don't. They don't. And so what happened was I got to the point where I could tell, you know, how you need to get into a story. How do you need to get out of it? What needs to be going on? And I still, like get kicked in the teeth all the time by George, and that's fine because I'd rather, have editorial comments that I think make me better than not have them at all. So.
Yeah, something people don't know about George is he's a really great editor. Like I'll send stories and we all get notes back. And I've, because of the nature of the writing, we're often looking at multiple versions of everybody's stories. And sometimes he can just nail those suggestions and that really, pump up a story. So I really appreciated learning from George, over the course of writing for Wild Cards.
You gave us the background of being in high school and
Yeah.
Having the self-possession to approach the group, which I think is that's a great story itself. But I also know that you have a great werewolf series, is it?
Yeah, and my Kitty Norville series about a werewolf who hosts a talk radio advice show for supernatural creatures. I think that's why I was able to kind of come to the group and come to George and Melinda and Walter and say, can I please write for Wild Cards? Because I actually had a career started by then. I was actually publishing, and I think I had sold my first novel by then. So I was actually able to bring something to the table and say, look, I'm for real. I know how to do this, which was a big help. I'm like Walter. I started really young. Unlike Walter, some of those early stories still exist. Like the first story I ever wrote was this gender flipped Black Stallion fan fiction because I loved the Black Stallion, but there were no girls in it. So I just made everybody girls and wrote my own version. And I was 8, so that's the kind of thing I was doing. And I started trying to get published when I was in high school, sending stories out to the magazines. It took a while before I actually got published, but once I got started, I kind of hit the ground and never looked back. Because I never found anything else I wanted to do. I loved writing. I loved books. My college degrees are in literature. So I just really wanted to have this life where I could read and write and make up stories. And that's what I've tried to do.
And I'm the oddball. I think in many ways I came to this late, but I feel like I'm two people that have been warring my entire life because I was a singer. I studied opera in Europe. I went to school in Vienna, and my ambition, like Caroline, I love music. I wanted to be a great opera star, but I'm not exactly built for it. And I had a good voice, but I didn't have that, superb voice that sends you to, La Scala. And so my accompanist at the time said to me, you need to go back to the United States and finish your education because you have a brain and it is a good thing not to waste your brain. So please go back to the United States. And, broke my heart. I was 19 years old. But I came back, I finished. And then I had a history degree, which meant that I had absolutely no marketable skills. You could spit on the street and hit an out of work history major. So I sort of just drifted on, and my father really wanted me to go to law school. So I went to law school and I did it, and I graduated and I passed the bar, and you feel like, well, I guess I better practice law, even though I realized I really hated lawyers at this point. And it wasn't until I met Vic, who took me to a party at another famous writer's home, Fred Saberhagen. And I can't remember if you were there, Walter, but I know Roger was and Susie Charnas. Mm-hmm. And
I don't think I was. I think I met you at at a party at Jack Spear's house.
At Jack Spear's house. And yeah. I walked out with Vic and I I clutched his lapels and I said, I must be part of this world. These are the most fascinating people I have ever met. So
and
I started
writing. You haven't even met me yet.
Exactly. And then you introduced me to role-playing games, for which I am eternally grateful. But it's an amazing group of people who write, and I wanted to be part of it. So I started writing in secret, and Vic would mentor me. And then I started selling. And ironically, my mother, who never read a word I wrote, by the way, unlike Walter's parents who took dictation, my mother was like, oh, thank you for this book. She could care less. She reminded me I had written plays for the neighborhood kids when I was 7, 8 years old. and I would give them all parts and we would perform it. And I had no memory of this until she brought it up. I was like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. So I just think there was this need to be in the arts. And since I wasn't going to make it as a great opera star, and honestly, I feel like I found what I wanted to be when I grew up. I can't imagine. I write my work, and then I often commit fan fiction at night after I'm done with my regular work because I can't stop writing because I love it. You know, I'm just like, okay.
Well, we all love that you all love to write, and I hope you don't ever have to do a resume, because the world needs stories, and it's obvious in one way or another you've all been storytellers from the very beginnings, whether it's as a musician or jotting down stories. That's wonderful. Because we're storytellers and stories heal, have these unprecedented historical times sparked any new character ideas for you? I'd love to hear about the process when the muse strikes. And let's give this to Carrie, and then we'll just round robin it.
It's been a strange time. I mean, of course, it's been a strange time. That kind of goes without saying. And it's been kind of interesting and difficult kind of hearing from all of my writer friends and how they're doing, because a lot of people, it's dried up, like the muse has dried up. I have a lot of friends who just haven't been able to write. I've been able to write because, like Melinda, writing is my happy place. So I've kind of been retreating there. Whether or not what I've been writing is readable or any good is a totally different question right now. And I've been finding it's kind of exactly the opposite. I don't want to write about what's going on. I've been writing historical fiction. You know, I wrote a story about the Norman conquest, you know, going back. I'm currently working on one about the War of 1812 because I don't want to be here. You know, I don't want to think about what's going on now. So fleeing to the past is like one way of dealing with that. But I think it's like you said, you know, we still need those stories too. So that's okay. I kind of have an interesting thing. Another one of my novels that came out a few years ago is called Bannerless, and it's a post-apocalyptic murder mystery. But part of the apocalypse was a pandemic. And economic collapse, and you know, environmental disasters due to climate change. And having written that book a couple of years ago, and then looking around at today's world is a little spooky, because when I was writing it, I was kind of thinking, what is the worst case scenario? And then this last year happened, and it's like, yeah, I'm not sure I want to think about that kind of thing anymore. So I am being inspired, but kind of in the opposite direction of what's actually going on in the world, which is an interesting phenomenon. And I'm really interested to like flash forward 5 years and see how we're all processing it then, because I can't predict it. I have no idea.
I am stunned. I've never gone this long without doing something interesting and creative. I haven't been playing bass. I started doing these 3-dimensional collages, and I stopped doing those entirely. A New Kitten did not help that. And writing has just been a nightmare. And I'm actually in the midst of trying to get a story done for Wildcards. And it's just some of the roughest going I've had in a long time. And it, you know, and like almost every writer I know, I suffer from depression. And, you know, this is not exactly helping anything. And so I think that must probably has something to do with it. But I'm stunned at how unresilient I have been through all this. It's very disappointing in myself. You know, I'm very disappointed in myself. But I wish that I didn't. I really envy y'all for being able to work through this and do something with this. I'm very jealous as I struggle to get this stupid story done.
I have to say that, you know, I live alone, and you know, I do go to the barn and I ride my horse. So, you know, I do get out and, you know, I hike and do other things, but I have not suffered from loneliness very often. And I think some of it is because I feel like I have this cosmic cheering section sort of with me all the time, which are all the characters in my various projects and my various books. They are my company. And you know, bits of dialogue float through, and I never, for most times, I don't feel tremendously alone, which may just be that I'm mentally, you know, unwell, because I can cope with having just these imaginary friends with me, but I'm really grateful for them.
Well, I think most writers are used to being alone because, you know, that's how we do our work. You know, and I've been a little bit lonely during this period, and I've been a little bit bored. But you know, I haven't been suffering through it, and you know, and I've been able to continue working because that's my happy place.
Yes.
These are all really powerful stories of kind of the different ways that we experience this. And I really appreciate your honesty, sharing how you've come through these times. It's very, very powerful. And thank you for that. Melinda, what fan fiction do you like? I know one of the things I love about this group is that you are fans as well as being fanned upon. And so when you go to write fan fiction, what do you geek out about the most?
Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars. I love Star Wars. But I'm also sometimes driven to commit fan fiction, if you will. I play video games too. And there was this particular video game that I loved with all my heart called Mass Effect. And they blew the ending. I mean, blew the ending of the third game. And I was so outraged that I wrote a 147-page story with the end for my shepherd so that, you know, properly, because I was like, okay, this cannot stand. So I have to be sort of driven to it, or I love it so much that I have to go play in that universe. And so for me, the thing I love so much, I don't have to write in a rage in Star Wars. I can write because I just love that universe. And then of course, because I wrote for Star Trek, I get all those Trek fans going, "You betrayed us," you know. Okay. And I'm like, yeah, but I work the show, which is why I don't want to deal with Star Trek anymore. And Star Wars is more fun.
Yeah, and I think your contributions to that world have earned you the ability to write whatever you want, because your episodes were iconic. So Carolyn, real quickly, what do you geek out about? What are you a big fan of?
Oh God, I'm sort of, I kind of go around and I get really into something for a period of time, and then I keep that in my heart, but then I find a new fan thing that I like. And actually right now, and I don't know, I'm so late to the game with this, but I've gotten into Korean and Chinese serial dramas and period pieces, and they're wonderful, and they're they're subtitled, so they're completely immersive. You can't like look away and sort of be doing something else, which is my usual inclination. And I love everything about them. They're so well written. They're so clever. They're so different narratively than what we normally do. I'm not saying that, you know, it's off the chart or anything, but it's interesting the way they go. They go in ways that you think they're going to go one way and they go a different way. And the things that they think that are important are really interesting too. So I've been enjoying the hell out of that, much to my husband's dismay, because he doesn't like them. So we're on the couch and he's watching one thing and I'm watching my iPad with my little earphones and obsessively watching. He's like, "Can you stop doing that?" I'm like, "No, no, I can't."
Have you fallen into the K-pop trap too? Before the pandemic, I was living in Koreatown in LA, and I just loved Korean culture and the food and the music and the books. I would go into the bookstore and try and find George's books in the Korean titles because they were just so beautiful.
Who knew of such things? I mean, K-pop I'm a little bit familiar with, but not very much. I just love cultures that are really, really different than sort of our own Western culture, mainly because it's so easy to become moribund and used to what you're doing and not thinking of things in a different way. And, we have a tendency to think everything's about us here, and it's so much not. So anyway, so that's what I've been geeking out, fanning about right now. And I sort of like obsessively go to, actors and actresses I like and look them up and, "Ooh, what have they been in? And can I get away with buying their movies on Amazon?"
That's
Well, they
awesome.
stream here.
Well, and also it's research. I mean,
Oh, that's
for a science fiction writer, you know, viewing stuff about other cultures is research.
I'll go with that.
Yeah.
I'll embrace that.
Everything's research.
True.
Yeah, don't argue, just do it.
Carrie, what are you geeking out about these days?
Oh, I am also a Star Wars geek in a pretty big way from way back. Also the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and WandaVision has been amazing, and because it is amazing in itself, but I'm so impressed at how they've kind of taken it to the next level. After Avengers Endgame, I was like, okay, this story is wrapped up. Where do we go from here? What can we do now? Is there, and I was so worried that they would just kind of drop the ball and not be able to keep the story going. And then WandaVision comes along and it's like, this is amazing. And it's amazing because it's commenting on its own genre while also commenting on the whole concept of sitcoms as comfort and you know, where do we find our comfort? So yeah, they're answering really big questions. So I'll follow the Marvel Cinematic Universe anywhere. I have been reading a lot. So another thing that I've heard a lot of people say is that they've had trouble reading over the last year just because of all the anxiety and everything going on. I have kind of tricked my brain into continuing to read by digging out some of my old favorites. So I think I've reread all of my Lois McMaster Bujold. And she has a series called the Vorkosigan Saga, which is really great space opera, but it focuses on kind of this one character and his family, and they're just fantastic. And part of it is, you know, I know what to expect. So I read these books and I know they're good and I know how they end, so I don't have to worry about it, but they're just really well written and they're really great characters and I can just fall into it. And that has been really nice. So it's, you know, if you're going to look for silver linings, kind of rediscovering some of my favorite books. Robin McKinley, Patricia McKillop, or a couple of other authors I've been reading. Just remembering what my, you know, some of my old favorite books that I haven't read in a while, and revisiting those has been really nice.
That's wonderful.
WandaVision is brilliant.
Yeah, right.
WandaVision is so fabulous.
Yep. We're coming to the end of this. This has been wonderful. I could monopolize your time and get into the minutia of some of my geeky questions. But what are you guys looking forward to on the horizon? What should we be looking forward to from your world that you're working on?
Oh, I have a new novel coming out in June that's actually about gaming a little bit. It's called Questland. It's coming out in June, and it is about it. I've been having a little trouble kind of describing this concisely. It's about a high-tech live action role-playing game that goes horribly, horribly wrong. A tech billionaire genius has set up an island to prove that sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And then the players kind of mutiny, and my heroes have to kind of go in and clean up the mess. And it goes horribly wrong, as all good novels do. So that's what I have coming out.
Fun. Melinda?
I have the fourth book in my space opera series, the Imperials series, coming up probably in a day or two. It will go live and be available. It's called Currency of War. You know, it's interesting because I finally came up my elevator pitch for Imperials, which is it's Star Wars meets Bridgerton. So you know, my hope is if anybody is listening in Hollywood land, Star Wars meets Bridgerton, I've got it right here.
That's the best tagline. Buns and guns. I love it. Caroline?
I'm in sort of an awkward position here. There's something that's coming up. There's something that's in the works. I can't talk about it. It's the thing that I'm very, very happy that I got a chance to do. I'm pretty sure I'm not allowed to talk about it yet, but when I can, I will. I will also say that I'm actually very pleased with the story that I have in the re-release of Deuces Down. Carrie did the interstitial for it, which was wonderful. And it was the first time, I can't believe I'm at this far in my career, that I wrote a male protagonist. And it was, you know, it took me a long time to feel like, yeah, I can do that and not sound like a complete dork. So anyway, but that's my incredibly unhelpful self.
That's very helpful. I'm actually looking forward to reading that. I found the re-release, and I'm really looking forward to how you everyone put that together. So that's exciting. And Walter, what's on the horizon for you?
I have way too many visual aids, I'm afraid. Okay, this is just out, The Best of Walter J.
Woo!
Williams, out from Subterranean, 200,000 words of short fiction, most of it not all that short. And it's you know, the best of my career going back over 30 years.
Wonderful.
And
Exciting.
let's see, what else we got? Fleet Elements, just out. This is the 7th book in my Praxis series. I would not start with this book. I would start with the Praxis. And it's a good introduction. It's a basically war and revolution as seen through the eyes of two star-crossed lovers.
Nice.
And they'll continue to experience war and revolution and be star-crossed for at least a few more volumes. New reissue. This is the 30th anniversary
Ooh.
edition of my novel Hardwired, which I have made available myself. And I have more visual aids, but I think I've delighted you enough at this point.
So would you recommend starting with Hardwired or Praxis if we were jumping into your world?
It depends on what you like. Hardwired is cyberpunk. If you like cyberpunk, that would be a good place to start. If you think you might like cyberpunk, that would be a good place to start. The Praxis is space opera. It's far future space opera. Emphasis more on the opera because the action is very operatic. Yeah. So the thing is, I've been at this for 40 years, and I produced about 40 volumes of fiction. So and I do a little bit of everything. I mean, I wrote the world's only let's see, Gothic Western science fiction police procedural.
Wow,
Which is called Days of Atonement. Days of Atonement takes place in New Mexico. My editor told me never to write anything like that again, but that was okay. I wrote 25 years ago. I wrote a Black Lives Matter novel called The Rift, and it crashed. It was 25 years ago was not the time to write a Black Lives Matter novel. It destroyed my career. I couldn't sell another book for 5 years. Just depends on what kind of thing you like. I've written comedy, I've written space opera, I've written near future thrillers. You know, go to my webpage, take a look at the bibliography at and the list of in the ebook store, and it'll give you summary. And if you see if you can find something you might like, take a look at it.
Sure. I'll have websites, go and check them out.
I was going to just say that's a great pitch, and please make sure everyone gives their website.
I started out. Walter, I still have my original mass market paperback of Hardwired.
Oh, all right.
In my books, my book collection.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you know, if it ever falls apart, you can replace it easily now.
Thank you all. This was amazing. It was so great to have such amazing authors and to have you share your history with Wildcards. And we're looking forward to seeing you play the role-playing game. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.